sometimes people get very impatient. They're like, right, I want the change. And they focus on the wrong bit. So they're obsessed with the kind of end of the journey. Very few people, when they have that sense of this isn't right. But the whole problem is they don't know what is right most of the time. And actually, the best thing you can do is sit in the messy middle, is not focus on, right, I really need to work out exactly what this next job is called, what it looks like, how I'm going to do it, where it is. It's like you can't figure that out on day one. There's going to be a period of mess and muddle and back and forth where you're just sort of on the journey.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. Have you ever looked at your career and thought, this isn't who I am anymore? Or perhaps it isn't who I ever was. Do you ever catch yourself dreaming of a life that feels more like you? In today's episode, we're going to unpack the wild hope, the resistance, and the grey space in between of navigating a career ending and transition. And my guest knows just how to navigate the messy middle of change. Rachel Schofield is a coach and author of the Career Change Guide, 5 Steps to Finding Your Dream Job. And Rachel spent 20 years as a journalist, reporting and presenting for the BBC, before she had a big realization in 2019 that she was a journalist who didn't really like politics, which led to the death of this high-profile career and the rebirth into a new career as a coach. And my wish is for today to bring hope to anyone if you're feeling stuck in your career, seeing how with commitment and curiosity, you can understand what makes you tick and how you can create a life that allows for more of that to flow in. So Rachel, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It's so wonderful to have you here. It's a topic that's very close to my heart, given my journey and given the fact that I wish I'd have had your book at the point that I was exiting my corporate career from Formula One. And to get us kickstarted into this story all around career change and really rooting into our own authenticity, I would love to just hear a little bit around your story and specifically that realization that led to the death of your career and your rebirth into a new purpose.
Sort of career RIP. I think what was striking me about this is that for a lot of people, I think, career death, if we call it that, is normally not sudden. For some people, it is sudden and dramatic. They're made redundant. Suddenly the whole company goes under, or a massive restructuring comes out of nowhere. And that change is kind of forced upon you. And it's sort of, monumental and big. For me, like for a lot of people, it creeps up on you. It's like a kind of illness that's building. You start to think, I don't feel great, and then it's sort of, it's a niggle and it becomes a bit bigger. And then you're like, this is a bit more, this keeps coming up every Monday or whatever it is. And I think for me, what happened at the BBC is I've been there 20 years and I never got to a point where I didn't really like it or I hated it or I was unhappy. And I want to say that because I think for a lot of people, that is the reality, actually. It's not that they go into work and they despise it and they hate their colleagues and they're bored 100% of the time. It's a sort of creeping feeling of, this is okay, but there's bits of it that are becoming less enjoyable to me. I can't necessarily see myself still here in 3 years, or this industry that I came into has changed and I'm not sure I fit anymore. So I think it's actually a lot more of a creeping thing. And it was definitely that for me. I'd had 2 decades at the BBC. I'd worked nowhere else. I went straight from university and my postgrad in broadcast journalism. I started in local radio and telly, worked my way through until I was on the BBC News Channel as a presenter. And for many a time, I would think, this is brilliant. I'm a presenter on the BBC News. And I still think that. It was brilliant. I worked with some great people. It was a lot of fun sometimes. It was also a lot of quite deep work, dealing with some really heavy, important, significant topics. But eventually, I think I just had a feeling, and it often is a feeling that you can't even articulate and work out why, that I wasn't sure it was what I wanted to do for the next 5, 10, 15 years. I realized I wasn't hustling. I wasn't looking around and going, oh, I want to do that. I should ask for that opportunity. I was starting to think, I'm not sure I want to do these crazy hours anymore. I think I'm not really in love with the topic anymore. I think it was probably Brexit that did for me, actually. I'd covered Brexit for so long. I was like, I can't interview any more politicians about Brexit, because it felt like, I think I realized what was missing is I loved the process. I loved, if I'm honest, being on the telly. I loved being a broadcaster. I loved the creativity and explaining things to people and going deep on things. But the things that I was working on, a lot of it politics, I didn't love. And I know for a lot of journalists, they live, breathe and eat politics. And I realized some of this leaves me cold. I'm frustrated by it. I don't want to talk to people who are just giving me sound bites and who are just going to say the same thing to me, regardless of how much I try and engage them in what feels like the real issue. So I think it was that creeping feeling of maybe I'm in the wrong place. Maybe I have these skills, but I'm using them in the wrong way.
Yes, I can really relate to that, actually. And I think, to your point, that actually it isn't for a lot of us that there's a real despising. I can really, really relate to that. And for me, it was in my career, I had, again, BBC, what a cool place to work. If you're a journalist, that is the pinnacle, isn't it? It's one of those landmark brands. And similarly for me, it was, I worked in music, Columbia Records and Geffen Records, in my opinion, the two coolest record labels that they are. And that was early in my career. And I remember having a real moment where I was stood at watching, it's quite timely because of Oasis coming back and no one being able to get tickets, but I was stood at the Roundhouse watching Oasis before they split up, and I felt dead inside, and I thought, I don't want to be here. And actually then fast forwards to, and I continued through my career, but I think at that point I didn't do the real reflection of what is it that is in alignment, isn't in alignment. And then fast forwards to me being in Formula One, another part of the entertainment space. And that was when I had that real, to your point, it's a feeling. It was, for me, it was really intuitive. It almost hit me in the gut of, okay, now your time is up. And I took that space to really realize and reflect on what is in alignment for me. And I would love to hear from you around, how was that process for you? So taking it from that realization into really understanding, actually, what does this next chapter look like for me?
And I think, without wanting to sort of overdo the analogy, but if we think of it almost like as a kind of creeping sensation, so it's not a sudden death, it's a kind of building illness. It's like, how do you do the diagnosis almost? Like, I don't feel well, but what's wrong with me? And who can help me sort of figure this out? What are my symptoms? And I think for me, it was that. It's sort of looking at what bits work, what bits make me feel good, what is it exactly that's making it not right? And for me, for some people, that will be like, the job is interesting, the people are ghastly, or I love the kind of purpose of this organization, but I can't stand my boss, or I can't work with the hours, or the money, just I can't make it work for me. I think for me, there were loads of things that were right. But as I say, it was around, I like the skills that I get to use. I like presenting. I like research. I like interviewing people. I like trying to go deep and find new angles on things. I like the creative treatment of TV and radio, where you take a story and you weave it and you tell it. But I realized that the material itself was wrong, as I say. So it's like, how can I take some of those same skills and turn them into something else? And for me, it was actually a long, drawn-out process. You wish you'd had my book. You said, I wish I'd had my book when I did this, because I didn't do it that way. I've gone on to figure this out. I've trained as a coach. So I think my first step was simply to say, I'm not sure this is all quite right. What might be interesting? And I simply signed up to take a coaching qualification. And I was lucky I had some money that I was able to do that with. But I did that alongside my BBC work. So again, I always say to a lot of people, career change isn't something like on a Friday you go, right, that's it, I'm out. And then Monday you start the new thing. There's going to be this massive liminal space in between, this overlap where you're figuring all the stuff out, where you're trying new stuff on. And definitely for me, I just started that coaching course with a sense of, this could be interesting. Let me lean into something which is still about people. It's about asking questions. It's about helping people figure stuff out. And thinking, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with that. I don't know whether I want to be an executive coach, or, there's so many kinds of coaches, people who coach around fitness and divorce and all sorts of things, And it took me a long time, once I'd built on those skills, to really kind of keep figuring out and getting to the point where I thought, actually, I like working with people who are trying to figure out career stuff. like me. And whether that's career change, which is where I started working with people, partly because I trained in that space and also I'd had my own experience, but that's continuing to evolve. So it's taken quite a lot of time, and the diagnosis and the treatment, didn't just kind of appear with one visit to the career doctors. It was like, yeah, I'm going to have to figure this out.
Oh, well, it really resonates with me and from your book as well, because you talk about it in the book. There's a messy middle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that scares people. I think sometimes people get very impatient. They're like, right, I want the change. And they focus on the wrong bit. So they're obsessed with the kind of end of the journey. Very few people, when they have that sense of this isn't right. But the whole problem is they don't know what is right most of the time. And actually, the best thing you can do is sit in the messy middle, is not focus on, right, I really need to work out exactly what this next job is called, what it looks like, how I'm going to do it, where it is. It's like you can't figure that out on day one. There's going to be a period of mess and muddle and back and forth where you're just sort of on the journey. And I think the more people can accept that and sort of think, I'm going to enjoy that journey with all its highs and lows, I'm going to realize that the journey, as I say in the book, is where the magic happens. It's like, it's by experimenting, it's trying things, it's going, oh, that great first idea I had about this alternative, that's not going to work. That wasn't what I thought it was at all. It's only by getting active and journeying towards whatever this might be that you're going to get clearer on the this. And that's odd, because for most problems, we know, right, this is the goal, let me just start walking towards it. But in career change, you don't know what the goal is. And the only way you can get clarity on this is to kind of start the journey and get into the messy middle.
I love that. Start the journey, get into that messy middle. And because your book walks readers through, it's a 5-step journey. And to your point, it does take a lot of reflection. It takes a lot of work. And I think at one point as well, you even say, this is like a mini job in itself. But actually, the reality is, obviously, to get those dividends paid back, we do have to put that investment in. And I can really resonate with the impatience that a lot of people will have when it comes to, I know I need to leave. I know there is the death, that letting go that I want to happen. But actually, I think what really resonates when I think of your book and your work, and also my own journey of me leaving Formula One, becoming a coach. I trained when I was on my notice period, had 3 months notice period. So I trained 3 months of my notice period, 3 months on the other side. But actually, I came out with that expectation of bang, business, purpose, everything's going to be completely locked down. I'm going to know exactly what I'm doing, where I want to go. And that's not been the case. I trained as a coach in 2022. And actually, I think it's only now, where am I, in 2020, beginning of 2025, that I feel like, I suppose there's that deeper grounding of my purpose. And to your point, there's been things that I've tried, that I've let go of. But actually, I think, when we look at nature, as Lao Tzu said, nature does not hurry, but everything is accomplished. I think bringing that patience is a really, really crucial piece. And that's what came through when I read your book, because I definitely was one of those people who had the intuitive gut punch of, you've got to leave. And then it was that urgency of, okay, I've got to get out quickly.
And I think there's something weird that happens with careers generally. So even if people aren't imagining a massive career change, there seems to be an expectation. I think it's lessening now when we look at the work of brilliant people like Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis in the squiggly careers space, and even just the stats about how many kinds of jobs and industries and changes younger people will go through as in their careers. But I think we're still struggling as humans to let go of the idea that a career is a kind of one-time decision. That, you need to know, do you want to be, a doctor, a lawyer, a marketing manager, someone in HR, whatever it is, as if you have to decide that at kind of 19 or 21, and then you're locked in. Actually, even if you are someone who has the joy of finding the right thing early on, you're still never locked in. You've got 50 years of this. You're going to have to evolve and change as your life seasons change as much as anything. The kind of things that are important to you at 21 may look very different if you decide to start a family, if you get divorced, if you get older, if you get ill, if you have to relocate. There's so many changes that will influence what our careers should look like for us and make them right for us. We change as human beings. So I think even if you're not someone who's thinking about a radical career shift, you're absolutely still going to be evolving, like, oh, I'm noticing I enjoy this more now than that. And this has surprised me that when I was, 5 years ago, I was loving this element of my work. Now, not so much. So I need to let this kind of run and say, maybe I want to reshape this. Maybe I really want to work that. And for some people, that will be massive and they'll change industry, they'll change tack. And other people, it's just little series of course corrections. And I think embracing that is fantastic because you're going to have a much more interesting and satisfying career than thinking, oh, I made my bed, I have to lie in it. I'm in this rigid decision. It's madness.
Yes, and I could really feel that when we're conscious to change and we're in that driving seat. And I'd love to speak more to that because they say along with birth and death, change is one of the few certainties that we have in life. But in your book, you shared around how our brain is hardwired to dislike change and uncertainty. So do you have any advice for those of us who are definitely rooted in our comfort zone and resisting the change that perhaps we're aware we need to bring in?
Yeah, I always think it's a very strange thing, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we're crying out for change in lots of elements of our life. It's like whether you're thinking, oh, I think I need to ditch this partner and get a new one, whether that's a divorce or just your first partner, whatever it is, or I want a new career. I'd like to move somewhere radical. So in a way, we crave change as humans, actually. If we think about it, in all honesty, we want novelty and different things. But on the other hand, we seem very scared of change. And I think you're right. It's that the linking word, the problem word is what sits in between us and change. It's not the change that's the problem. It's the uncertainty we have to handle before that. And that's what our brain doesn't like. Our brains, and I'm no neuroscientist, but I love reading about this stuff. Our brains are prediction machines. We do well when our brains can see what's going to happen because that way they can use less energy. They don't have to be scanning and thinking and processing and coming up with new solutions and new ways of being. They don't want to have to deal with that. They want, I know this situation, I know what's needed, let's be certain. And similarly, the more certain our brain is, the more it can keep us safe because they're like, yeah, I know where the dragons are, I know where the tigers are, this is all good, you're going to keep safe. So it's the uncertainty that we struggle with. And I think there's some really interesting work being done around this. There is a neuroscientist called Catherine Templer-Lewis who works with Sam Conniff. They're called the uncertainty experts. And they're really looking at the whole issue of how do we get more comfortable with uncertainty? And I think the first thing is realizing where our natural uncertainty levels sit, because we're all different. Some people are able to tolerate more uncertainty than others. Some people find it very, very stressful and unsettling. But ultimately, they've done some really interesting work, and I won't be able to do it justice, but thinking about that model that actually fear and excitement sit very close together in the brain. When you properly monitor the brain and see how it responds to both, there's not that much difference. And people always say we need to reframe it. And that sounds really simple. Oh, yeah, I'm not scared. I'm just super excited. And then you're like, no, I really am quite scared. But it's at least letting yourself play in that space and go, I'm having these sensations, but they're normal. That's okay. Let me kind of notice them and tap into them. And stop expecting that there will be certainty, because generally, especially with career change, you don't have a crystal ball. And that's hard because people would say, well, of course I would make this change. I would start retraining as a lawyer, or I'd throw it all in and open a coffee shop. If I could only see that it will all work out, then change wouldn't be a problem. But it's the uncertainty. So I think it's realizing what your brain is doing. Realizing, if you look at the work of people like the uncertainty experts, that there are some really interesting things about when we are in an uncertain state, the brain has an amazing capacity to learn in that state. Not when you're so uncertain that you're stressed and frantic, but they've done some really interesting work about how it's a really creative space to sit in as well, if you can make peace with it. And also, I think just acknowledging to yourself, I'm scared of the uncertainty. So how can I move forward and create more certainty? You're never going to get 100% certain. But, it's that for career change, it's how can I test some of these ideas before I take the jump? Because what most people fear is, well, out of the frying pan into the fire. It looks great from over there. The grass looks greener. But what if I throw it all in, I take this massive new step and it's all a car crash? So I think it's something like, well, how can you take the smallest step towards that? How can you start to investigate whether this inkling you have, this idea you have that you might want to be a dog groomer or a marketing manager or a graphic designer or a dry stone waller or whatever it is, how can I start to test that and minimize the levels of uncertainty? And that's a slow process. That is not something you can do in a day, But there are ways often that you can at least start to engage with that. Talk to people who do the work you're interested. Find small ways, like go on a really short course. Don't sign up for a 15 grand master's and then a week in go, oh my gosh, this is boring. This is what I thought it was. That's a disaster. But there are lots of ways that you can kind of go, I'll put a toe in. I'm going to find out as much as I can about this to lower the levels of risk and uncertainty. And then I can feel more confident about the change I want to make.
I love that. And actually, if I'm weaving the threads together, because there's that dipping that toe in to help to bring just those little small steps to certainty, to bring that stability, security in, and that knowing, but also in that dipping that toe in and taking it step by step. That is where the practice of patience is required. Because actually, to that point, you made me think about when I went to uni, because how we go through the school system and you just, I don't know, I hadn't really thought about what I wanted to do. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to biology, I'll do biology at uni. And I did have that moment. I remember first day in the labs at UCL and I thought, what the hell am I
This is not what I thought. Whose idea was this?
Yeah, this isn't as fun as I thought. I don't know what I thought we'd be doing, but not this. Had that real moment. And then I went out and started interning at Columbia Records and then went on my own career path that definitely wasn't biology related. But I think that patience and that exploration, because what came through really loudly from your book is that curiosity and bringing that spirit of curiosity into the journey and what that can give you. But to your point, if we expect it to happen overnight and that we're suddenly going to go from, I don't know if it's a complete career change, to understand who we are, shed perhaps layers of and masks and all of stuff, that all the shoulds that maybe weren't ever in alignment to us or were at one point, and that's going to happen overnight. It won't. So it does require that patience and then that step by step.
And I always feel bad, but I put this quite early on in the book because I think you've talked about this, one of your previous guests, but the world of kind of coaching can be a little bit, I won't use the word that's coming into my brain that begins with a W, but I'll use a different one. It can be a bit woo-woo. I was thinking of a word that ends in Y. And because it can be a bit fridge magnety. I say in my book, this kind of like, if you can dream it, you can do it.
Yeah.
We're sort of slightly brought up on that a little bit. If you overdose on Instagram, you can sort of be like, well, all I need to do is just make this decision. I can dream that I'm married to George Clooney and I'm a Hollywood actress, just because I can, that ain't going to happen. So I almost want to front it, not in a way to kind of crush people's dreams, but I also want to say this stuff will take time. The average, depending on what kind of career change you want to make. But, when I work with people, it's often kind of 6 months to anywhere up to kind of 2 years, depending on, and that's not for everyone. It might depend how much of a shift, whether you need to retrain, whatever you need. But I always want to say, just put that on the table, because that in a way takes the pressure off. The idea that you can magic this up in a month, it's not actually helpful to people. I think knowing that it's going to take some time, in which case don't obsess about the outcome. Let's just enjoy and have some fun with the journey. And also let's engage with our own reality that, we don't just get to throw everything in. We've probably got small children or elderly parents or rent or a mortgage. And that, again, that's not to dampen it, but that's just to say that's my lived reality. I'm not going to let that discourage me or make me feel like it's not possible. Because actually, it probably is possible, but you might have to be creative in the way you do it. It is going to take some time. You're going to have to be curious and innovative and get other people to help you and take the baby steps. And I think if you can accept that and embrace that, then you're not doing it wrong. And that this idea that, nothing is in the way and you just need to follow your dreams and your passion, which to me, I'm a bit like, great idea, but let's also think about who we are and what this is actually going to look like for us.
I'm so with you there. I actually had someone who said this to me just as I was exiting Formula One, the classic jump and the universe will catch you. And I thought, and it really connected me into the fact that actually, I was in a place of privilege when I left F1 because we just bought our house. It was cheaper than we thought we were going to have to spend. So I had savings. So I had that privilege. So there was a safety net there. And that's why, I totally agree with you. There's so much pressure in the coaching industry. And I think that there's also the other side, which I totally subscribe to. And then I realized that's not feasible for most people. It's the 6 months to six-figure business and all of these pressures, or where you see these stories where people say, oh, I founded a six-figure business while I was in the 8 months before I had my child, and you can too. And that's a lovely story if that's what happened for you. But I much prefer that slower, sustainable, because actually I think that's where, well, firstly, that's where it's feasible without burning ourselves out. But also, I think that's when reading your book, what really resonated with me was that, again, that deep work. Because the reality is, if I think about the fact that I was in a quote unquote cool career, but actually, my biggest realization was I was living someone else's dreams. I bought the hype from all the media that I consumed and everything that I was listening to and watching on TV. But when it really came down to it, that wasn't my dream. And stripping back those layers, I suddenly realized, oh, I don't know who I am. I don't know the values that really, truly drive me. I have a load of shoulds, but there's a lot that I need to peel back. And actually, I ended up doing that on the other side of leaving Formula One. But to your point, actually, there can be a lovely path where you can do that while you are still in your current job, and also exploring. Everybody's got those different paths, don't they?
Yeah. And I think the only caveat I always want to say, because occasionally there are people listening who are like, yeah, but I cannot bear to be where I am anymore. And I always worry that I'm not saying to people, if you're in a job that is toxic, that is making you unwell, if you're burning out, if it's intolerable to you, I'm not saying, well, just sit tight and enjoy the journey. That's a different reality. And I think then you're talking about, well, how can I make a transition? How can I buy myself some time? Whether that's, I'm actually going to, for now, kind of recreate this same role, even though I know it's not what I want long term, but it will allow me to take that work into a different environment, say, which will work better for me. And that buys me the time to kind of do that deeper work and that exploration and the going out and trying things. So I always just want to say, it's not like I'm saying you must stay put if you're utterly miserable. That might look a bit different. But generally, yeah, I think giving yourself the reality check of this will take some time. So why not lean in and enjoy it? And actually, the odd thing is what you often notice with people who are unhappy in their work, again, not people who are at the extreme end of that, is once they start to feel some agency and start doing things, even though they're still in the work that they don't love, often the work that they don't love either takes more of a back seat, so it starts to dominate their thinking less, which generally means you feel better, or actually you sometimes feel a bit more engaged because you can see that there's an end point now. You've got more agency. And I don't mean engaged in the sense that you're like, oh, I'm going to stay. I love this job. No, you still know that you want to move on, but somehow you've kind of taken back a bit of control over your career. And that can actually be quite exhilarating generally.
I love that. I bring a lot of nature storytelling into when I work with clients, and actually being able to explain when they are at endings and that dying stage of, it's like autumn. Those leaves are slowly falling off the tree. You're letting go. You can be more boundaried. I think that can be a beautiful perspective, just as you shared, of actually this is the ending. There is the end that is coming. Yeah. And actually we can let go. And also I'm so pleased that you shared that around people where they are in toxic situations, because I was bullied when I worked in advertising by a boss, to the point where I broke out in a skin rash when I saw him. It literally came out of me, but I stuck at that job. And because I didn't know where to go. And I think even that sort of advice of, I knew I didn't want to be in advertising, but even that sort of advice of, actually, it could be a move to somewhere that isn't toxic, that is safe for you to be. I think that's a really important one, because I've encountered way too many clients where there is workplace bullying. And I just think there is a lot of different toxic situations. And to your point, sometimes, there isn't that. It's not good for you to stay in a situation. And also,
it's not a solid base or a safe place for you to kind of feel that you've got the space to work on the next move from. You're just demoralized and tired and burnt out. You're not going to be able to give what the next step any real thought. So
that's so true, actually, because if I take myself to that situation, if someone then said, okay, let's elevate up, let's connect into what's most important, I felt like I was just there to survive every single day. So in that fight, flight, freeze mode, I don't think I could have ever been able to then say, okay, let me connect into my heart and really truly start listening, because it just wasn't the right.
The confidence piece, I think, any change where you're putting yourself out there as if to say, right, I'm ready to in some ways show up and be someone a bit different. If you're already feeling very small and your confidence has been made to suffer, that's a place to operate from as well. Because when I work with people who are thinking about a career shift, I'm saying to them, one of the best ways to start exploring is to go out and talk to people. Now, if you're feeling so wretched in your current work and so kind of demoralized and undervalued, that's quite a hard ask to go out and sort of, you're not being asked to sell yourself. I've never said to someone so, but you want to show up and be enthusiastic and talk about your next steps. If you're feeling utterly kind of like small and dejected, that's not going to be an easy thing to do either.
Yeah, I really feel that. And obviously, if anyone is listening and is going through that, all of our love and compassion for you, because it's a really difficult place to be there. But I think what really came through as you were saying that, and if I could speak to my past self, really around doing everything that you need to nourish you. And I love that piece of advice as well that you shared earlier of just, is there a sideways move? It doesn't have to be forever. Again, that can just be with that acknowledgement, the ending is coming, but to just get you to that space. And actually, what I really connect into is there was a conversation I had internally in the group, the agency group that I was in, about moving to a different agency. But I didn't take that because in my mind, I thought, no, this isn't right. I want to take a leap into something. Yeah, but actually that could have been a move that could have really nourished me for that last, I suppose, 18 months before I then took that leap. So I also want to cover off this topic of our identity. And you speak a lot about this in your book. And what really resonates with me is around how much our identity can be so wrapped up in our career. And for me, there was that big letting go of Tanya from Formula One, Tanya who works in the entertainment industry. So I'd love to get any of your thoughts on that letting go and the death of our identities that are defined by our career, and just how we can navigate and deal with that process.
Yeah. And I had that. I mean, as you say, I was really lucky. I was at the BBC, and that was a huge, I'd only ever worked for the BBC. It's like one of those saying, you cut me in half like a piece of rock, you would find BBC in me. So that to me I was very proud to work for the BBC. It was a great organization, still is. I felt it was a shorthand. It was a cloak that I used to wear. Oh, where do you work? Oh, I work for the BBC. And I hope I didn't say it in that kind of like, oh, look at me. But, in my heart, there was a little bit of like, I'm quite proud of that. People be like, oh, what do you do? It's a known quantity like you. So I think a lot of our sense of self, a lot of our sense of status and ego, if we put it like that, often can be wrapped up with where we work, what we do, our job title, and that sense of, I am someone. It's on the door, or it's on my, my email sign off. It looks kind of good. And it allows us to present ourselves in a very quick way. It's like a little box that people can put us in, and it carries with it lots of nice stuff normally that we kind of go, oh yeah, people will realize, I'm creative, or I'm on the telly, I'm this, I'm that. And I think that for me definitely was one of the hardest things, because I knew as well, career change is often quite wrapped up in what other people think. It shouldn't be, but we're very mindful, aren't we, of what other people think. So I always thought, if I say to people, I'm thinking of leaving the BBC, they'd probably look at me like I was mad, because lots of people would like that job. And so I think trying to get to grips with what am I letting go of? And I think it's trying to be sure that you're not kind of throwing everything out. One of the things I noticed, this is a slightly different example, but I used to do quite a lot of work with women returners. So women who'd stepped out of the workplace for, any number of years to raise a family or, other commitments. And one of the things that I used to say to them when I heard them say it is sometimes people would say, oh, I'm a mum at the moment. I used to be an accountant. I'm like, you used to be, but you still are an accountant. Just because you're not working, it's not that you're not an accountant anymore. You still have all those skills and abilities and experience. Okay, maybe you've not been actively using them for a few years, but there's no like, you're not that anymore. And I think in a similar way, if you can kind of follow my train of thought, when we move on, unless we're desperate to totally reinvent ourselves because we used to be a kind of serial killer, very unlikely, we don't need to kind of totally distance ourselves. It's almost like, how do I release enough of that identity that I feel I can kind of bank the bits I want, but I can still take with me the bits that serve me? And for most people then, although they might think that they are totally starting again, that they have totally reinvented themselves, that's often very unusual, actually, that you're doing something that has no overlap. You might have to work a bit hard to see it, But for me, if you take my example, so I was a BBC journalist and presenter, became a coach and career development trainer. People might go, well, those are two totally different things. But to me, I could see, I do have an exercise in the book for people when they're struggling with this, like, how do I tell my story of why I used to do that and now I do this, why my identity was this and now it's that, is you find your golden threads. And for me, I could find these threads around communication, around connecting with people, around storytelling, around interviewing, around asking powerful questions, around listening, that showed up as a journalist and a presenter that still I use every day as a facilitator, coach, a career development trainer. So I think it's like not throwing everything out, just releasing what doesn't serve you or parking it. Because we were chatting earlier before we started recording that the weird thing that can happen as well is you don't want to throw it all away, because it does several things. It makes you feel like a beginner. It makes you feel very vulnerable and naked. You're like, I have nothing. I used to be a teacher, and now I want to go and, work in the art world and my teaching. I was a maths teacher. I'm a beginner. I've got nothing. And that's not a happy place. So you don't want to throw away all of your teaching identity, because there's probably lots of stuff that you can take with you that are nice pieces of clothing and fig leaves that stop you feeling so naked, skill sets and experiences and strengths that need to come with you and you need to really own. But also the point being that if we throw everything away too quickly, we sometimes are a bit surprised when things kind of bob back up, because we thought we'd put them in the bin and we didn't need to. So, for example, with me, I'm like, I'm not a presenter or BBC journalist anymore. But what I'm noticing more and more is as my coaching evolves, and I've been doing this 5-6 years now, there's more of my BBC presenter stuff coming through. I'm thinking, actually, there are bits of my work there around communication skills, around presenting skills that I'd quite like to teach people, that actually have huge importance for people in their careers as well. They need to know how to give great presentations. They need to know how to story tell and all of these things. And I'm quite enjoying picking some of those things back up. So I think it's like, how much really needs to die and how much needs to go back to your kind of nature metaphor, how much needs to kind of just hibernate for a while or let its season pass, and then some of these shoots will appear again. And it might surprise us, but actually it's really nice if we lean into that idea of, rather than identities being kind of thrown out, we're just evolving. And some stuff comes with us. We keep ownership of it because it's really powerful and helps us not feel quite so exposed in this new identity. And some stuff we've parked and we'll revisit. So it's kind of, it's like, don't be too brutal in your culling of your old identity unless you really hate it and it says all the wrong things about you, because actually you haven't totally changed who you are. You're just letting it kind of move around a little bit, reform, transform.
What's really resonated with me is also how healing that can be where there is that frustration, because it's such a beautiful exercise in the book. I think it's the one where it's write your timeline, all your different careers, and then those other moments, whether it's your studies, if you do volunteer work, etc. And then you have some lovely prompts to guide through. And as you were speaking, what really resonated with me is where there are those frustrations, actually what a power, I wish that was an exercise I'd done to be able to really root myself into. And I think I still had connected into all of the wonderful stuff in my corporate career, but feeling, as I think a lot of us, when there is burnout at play in our decisions to leave, that actually we can come out feeling pretty exhausted and just thinking, oh my goodness, F that life, etc. But actually how healing it is to be able to really root back into all of those experiences, including those ones that actually, if I think about part of my healing journey from my experience in advertising, was rooting into the value of me and the value of the experience that I took from the work that I did love in that chapter in my life. So I think that's such a powerful one. And then to your point, I love that you brought the nature metaphor in. It is like when flowers die back and then the seeds come through the next year, there's that death and that rebirth. It's a continuous cycle, isn't it? So as well, those little seeds that are planted from all of our different careers, just staying open and aware to be able to say, hey, as you just shared, that's a lovely thread from my BBC career that's now coming through in my in my business. I think that just staying open to all of that can be a really, really powerful one. But actually bringing that awareness in, I think, if anyone is going to pick up a copy of your book or have a listen to it, I definitely think that exercise is one that I would recommend to anyone. And I'm probably going to end up doing it this weekend as well.
Oh, thank you. And actually, as you were speaking, this isn't an exercise in the book, but it's something that I also wonder if it'd be worth doing for people who are leaving one identity, behind in some ways, is before you move on from any job, and this isn't even necessary for career shifters, it's like, do you want to just take a moment to kind of bank your achievements, to write down, what am I proud of? What did I do? Where did I add value? What are some of the things that I'd like to kind of take with me that maybe don't seem massively relevant to this next step I'm about to take, but I want to capture them as well, because at some point they will be relevant and they'll help me see those golden threads. They'll help me see the patterns. They'll help me remember, yes, maybe that previous role wasn't everything I wanted. I didn't love it, but I did some good things. People valued X, Y, and Z about me. I gained some really great skills. And maybe before you kind of I'm so over it. It's like, yeah, just capture those, put them somewhere, because you'll forget. And actually, you don't want to, just because you want to kind of maybe forget the job that turned into something awful at the end. You don't want to forget all the brilliant things you did and why you were good at it and what people said, oh, I love working with you. So maybe take that with you as well.
Oh, I love that. It's a bit like the gratitude jar, but doing it for, those threads of all that value, that experience, or the wonderful feedback. Because again, as you talk about in your book, we've all got negativity bias. So we will focus more on the negative. So let's capture that and let's not forget it. And actually, I think that would be really, really beneficial as well. Yeah, if you're at the point in which you're coming to update your CV or all of that stuff, to be able to root into that.
You don't always have a good memory. And it's the worst thing. It's like, oh, what did I do 6 years ago? Because I do need it still. Yeah. And I think what can happen as well, just a final thought, is sometimes by the time we leave a role, if we are making a career shift and we are sort of letting that side die, because we're not enjoying it, we have come to equate that with, I'm not good at this job. For some people, they're almost like, I need to move on because obviously it wasn't really for me. You're so kind of down on the job that you sort of almost down on yourself as well. So I think remembering that it was the job itself, the fit wasn't right, but it didn't mean that you didn't do it well. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Really, really powerful. And before I come into my final question for you, I just wanted to ask if there's any listeners who are thinking, I've been ignoring that call, or I've been thinking about the fact that I need to have a change. What would you say would be the first step that they could take on that path?
I think for me, and you see this in the book, it's a kind of process of two different things molding together. It's a piece about exploring who you are, figuring out, well, what's going to suit me based on what I know about myself. So that's self-awareness piece. So giving some thought to, what do I care about? What motivates me? What am I really good at? All of those kind of exercises that you see in the book. But more than that, and I think that's often where people stop. And that's why they stay stuck, because they sit there and they think, I'm going to think. I'm going to do a lot of thinking. I'm going to think about who I am. I'm going to think about what jobs I can, conjure in my head. I'm going to Google. Everyone thinks they kind of Google their way through a career change. I will just put in, if I am this, what jobs would suit me? Go on. I know everybody's done it. What other jobs do journalists do? And you get a very small sample out. And the thing about knowing yourself, great. And you do need to do some thinking and some self-awareness and some self-reflection. But I think what I would say to myself is, get off your ass. Stop kind of Googling and faffing and actually start exploring in a really kind of playful, fun way. Just expand your world. The hardest thing about a career shift, unless you're someone who in a dream it comes to, I must be, this new thing. Most of us, we live in a world, particularly if we've been in an industry a long time, we don't know what else is out there. We don't know what else we could do. And we try and Google it, but Google doesn't know either. So what you've got to do is you kind of got to explode your own world a little bit. So it's kind of like, I think what I would have done is get out and do more stuff, not necessarily with a view to I need to find what my next job is, but just go and hang out with some different people, go and attend some weird classes, go to book launches, go to a lecture, on whatever, not because you think that your next career move lies in it, but just mix up what's coming into your world, because that's where you stumble across, is that a thing? you meet someone who says, oh, this is my job. You're like, what even is that? I don't know that was a thing, I think allowing yourself to get out, widen your world, tread some different pathways, get in front of some different people with no expectation. But then as the little sparks start to emerge, as you start to think, maybe there's something for me here, then start to follow those trails. Who else can I talk to? Who might have a cup of coffee with me? I'm going to say to all my mates, who do you know who works in the aviation industry or who works in whatever it is that's floating your boat, just to start exploring. So I think doing more than thinking. Yes, think, but get out, do things, talk to people, try things, because that's where the messy middle is and where the success is ultimately, even though at times it feels like doors close, things don't work out. This brilliant idea that you thought was the thing, you realize, oh, like with your biology degree, like, this isn't what I thought it was. But that's good because, people are scared of finding that out. I think sometimes people do nothing. It's like, yeah, but what if that's not what I think? Great. You've hit a dead end. Fantastic. You can stop fannying about, dreaming about the day you own a surf shop in Hawaii. Actually, if the first time you go surfing, you're like, oh my God, I don't think I ever want to surf again. It was hideous. I swallowed so much water. I hate wetsuits. It mucked up my hair. Then you're like, okay, great. You've dealt with that. You don't want to run a surf shop in Hawaii. Let's move on to the next thing. Result. I think people often worry that that's a bad thing. Actually, the more that you can rule stuff out and find new shoots of ideas, the better. And you can only do that by going and trying stuff.
Oh, I love that. Yes. And in a world of not just Google, but ChatGPT, don't give your power away to them. Empower yourself through that action.
They don't have the answer.
Yeah, they definitely don't have the answer. And so, Rachel, I have one final question for you. And this is your note to self. So from where you're sitting now, if you could write a note to yourself in 2019, just when that realization was hitting you, what words would you share with yourself?
I think two things. I think be gentle with yourself. Don't set these expectations of figuring it all out straight away too high. And I think the second one, and I imagine on this brilliant podcast, you've heard this one before, but it's like, stop worrying what other people think, because they don't think about you half as much as you were. A lot of the hesitation around career shifts as well is like, what would people think? How will I explain it to people? They'll think I'm bonkers. So what? They don't, to be honest, they got their own going on. They're not going to worry. So quit thinking about how does this appear and just lean into what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? How do I want to move forward? And try as best you can not to kind of listen too much to the voices of people ready to pour a bucket of cold sick over your next big idea.
I love that. Stay rooted in yourself and step away from that comparison. And Rachel, finally, for anyone who wants you, your book, and just your wisdom in their world, where can people find you?
Well, that's very nice of you. They won't get wisdom. They'll get a good kicking and there's, lots of encouragement to go and do stuff. I don't have the answers either, I should say. Mm-hmm. When I work with people, it's like we work together. So the best place to find me is I'm on LinkedIn. You can see my name there, Rachel Schofield. But my website as well is rachelschofield.co.uk. And you can find all the stuff I do there. So as I say, yes, I work in the career change space, but I also do quite a lot of corporate work around career development, around communication and presentation skills. As I say, the re-emergence of some of my old identities and the blending, which is exciting. And I also, if somebody is thinking about careers and LinkedIn, the other thing I do is I have a self-paced online course called Shine on LinkedIn, which is a series of modules, about 7 hours worth, that you can get yourself a really powerful story around your career, whether you're a career change or just looking for that next step or looking for your next clients, whatever that might be. So come say hi on my website. And on social media, I'm not hugely on them so much, but on Instagram, my handle is @reworkyourlife, @reworkyourlife. And you can always DM me there.
Oh, wonderful, Rachel. Thank you so much. And I'd say all these threads, they are so interconnected, aren't they? Because I think there's really something around, how we show up, that confidence and everything in these new chapters. So I am so grateful to you. As I shared at the beginning, I wish I'd have known, or I wish your book would have been in my hands at the point at which I was exiting Formula One. And I'm so grateful as well for this conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tanya. It's been great fun.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more dead conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside, and we'll never make it, and we'll never break it.